The Florida man who murdered his pregnant boyfriend and stole the life of the victim's unborn child has a lengthy history of terrorizing the people in his life. So I'm going to unpack that opening statement a little bit. This is in regards to an absolute tragedy which occurred in Florida. Apologies, the article that I've read through didn't tell me the day that this happened. I believe this happened approximately a week ago, several days ago, in a town called Inwood, which is within the city of Winter Haven, Florida. 26-year-old Riley John Groover shot his boyfriend multiple times. His boyfriend was called Camden Ryder, and Camden was 21 years of age and a transgender man. So that means that Camden was born female and had transitioned to being a male. At the time of his murder, Camden's murder, Camden was 8 months pregnant. So I know that's a bit unusual. I know that's a little bit complicated for a lot of us to get our heads around, but that is the situation, that Camden was born a female, transitioned to being a male at the time of her murder, his murder. Apologies. He was 8 months pregnant, so that means that both the life of Camden Ryder and his unborn child was taken away. The shooter, Riley John Groover, then took his own life. So we're told that they were a loving couple. They lived with Riley's mother. They were planning on marrying, but they did experience a lot of arguments, and apparently some of those arguments would be volatile. There was a level of violence involved within their relationship, domestic violence. However, we're not provided with any specifics in regards to that. I think it would be fairly safe to assume that the murderer, Riley John Groover, would have been the aggressor in regards to the domestic violence. However, that hasn't been spelt out within the article that I've gone through. But the article does tell us a little bit more about Riley John Groover's past, and I'm not going to read through every last detail. There are a few different incidences which I'm going to say most clearly are of a violent nature. However, we have seen far, far worse from those that end up murdering their loved ones. So we're told that in 2014, when Riley Groover was 17 years of age, he shot 5 BB pellets through the window of a home. 5 BB pellets. So we're not told what injuries, if any, that caused. I suspect it didn't cause any injuries. However, the shooter, Riley Groover, continued to harass his victim. He also resisted arrest in regards to that incident, to the point that he kicked the arresting officer. He was convicted of battery on a law enforcement officer for that. And there were other incidences. When he was 19 years old, he broke a bottle on the kitchen floor, and he used a hatchet to break several doors in the residence in which he lived. So again, we're not told of anyone sustaining any injuries, which is why I say we've seen a lot worse. We have seen cases of people that have committed all kinds of heinous violent acts, and they've continued to be in a relationship with somebody or other and have proceeded to murder, and that isn't the case here really. To an extent, this guy, Riley Groover, took the life of his boyfriend, his pregnant boyfriend, took the life of his unborn child, I believe his unborn child, certainly Camden's unborn child. So he does have a violent past, we're told, but again, in my interpretation, which you might disagree with, I've got to say arguably fairly trivial violence. And I don't mean to fully trivialize and downplay the acts that he caused. I'm sure firing 5 BB pellets into the window of a home, that could have caused serious injury. I'm sure it would have caused a great deal of concern for the residents of that property. But if we look at this with a bit of perspective, we've just seen far worse violence out there. So I think really that's the bulk of the details that we have. Of course, full condolences to the family and friends of the victim, Camden Ryder, along with her unborn child. I think it's also appropriate to say condolences to the family and friends of the shooter, Riley Groover. Of course, his family and friends are going to be traumatized by this situation as well. They're innocent parties, and they've got this tragedy disrupting their lives, disrupting their emotional well-being. So condolences to them too. And I guess at this point, I'm going to try to string a commentary, try to throw a few thoughts into the mix for whatever it's worth. And I don't really have too many thoughts. I've got a couple couple of thoughts. I mean, one thing to mention, which I think is potentially relevant, I think it's perhaps good information to know, is that as far as I understand, I think I've read along the way somewhere or other that the transgender community does have a high preponderance of domestic violence within it. Statistically wise, proportionally wise, there's a higher level of violence or domestic violence within the transgender community than there is in the heterosexual community, as far as I understand. So I'm just throwing that in there. Could be wrong, don't think I am, but there does seem to be a higher degree of violence in the transgender community, which of course this applies here. Camden was born female, transitioned to male. We're not told when that happened. In regards to the domestic violence which occurred within their relationship, we're not told who was the aggressor. We presume it was Riley Groover, who was not transgender, but it was a transgender relationship, I think it's fair to say. So there's that to consider. And generally, when we come across these absolute tragedies, ultimately this was a murder-suicide. A 21-year-old man, transgender man, lost their lives. So did the child that they were bearing, the unborn child. So this is an absolute tragedy, of course. And normally in these tragedies, I question mental illness. So if we were to ask, was mental illness at play, then what would my answer be? I don't know. This guy had a history of violence, however, fairly trivial violence compared to other types of violence. He wasn't jailed for any of the violence. The article refers back to violent acts which occurred in 2014 and 2016, a long time ago. So we are told there was some level of domestic violence in the home, but again, we're not told of any injuries. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to excuse the violence that this Riley Groover committed, but I'm just trying to make the point that in my estimation, for whatever it's worth, I don't think he was an out and out lunatic. He had anger issues, no doubt. He had a tendency towards violence, no doubt, but we've seen far, far worse. So seemingly this guy snapped. He was able to access his mother's gun and used it multiple times on the victim, Camden Ryder. Was he mentally ill, or did he just snap? I would think he just snapped. That would be my take on it, for whatever it's worth. Maybe that's a sign of the pressures that we're facing in society nowadays. Apparently, the couple argued about finances. I would imagine that's extremely common out there across the Western world for the last little while, and perhaps for a little while more. A lot of people are under extreme financial constraints, and yeah, sure, it's going to lead to arguments with loved ones, amongst loved ones. And I guess gun control is going to be another factor. I'm not a gun control expert. I don't know what the laws are in Florida. I believe you guys have quite a few guns there. You've got crocodiles or alligators there. You need to protect against them. I'm generally pro-gun, generally. I feel that your criminals have got guns, so you need to be able to protect yourselves, but it does open the door to these kinds of tragedies. Law-abiding gun owners can have a mental snap and kill, murder. To clarify, it seems that Riley Groover wasn't the owner of the gun. It was Riley Groover's mother who had the gun. Seemingly, Riley had access to it, and tragically, he used it. So I guess that's all I have to say at this point. I've rambled for a little bit more than I should have, perhaps. So I'm going to wrap things up at this point. If you appreciate the coverage, please do like, comment, subscribe, share the video as you see fit. Feel free to drop any comments. You can agree with me, disagree with me. Have I missed any important points? Do that. Do drop a note. Don't be hateful, please. I mention that because this does involve a transgender person, Camden Ryder, the victim, and it is, I'm going to use the word peculiar. I believe that's a fair word to use. It's a peculiar situation to consider the boyfriend as being 8 months pregnant. It's peculiar. We can say that it's odd. I just did say that it's odd, but that in itself does not justify any hate towards the victim or any ridicule or such. So feel free to drop comments, but please do be respectful, of course. And I'll wrap things up at this point. Thank you.